Welcome back to Surviving My Mid-20s, episode 1, where we're going to be talking about how to nail an interview with little job experience. So flashback 3 years ago, I had an interview to be a hostess at a really nice restaurant, and now I'm the executive assistant for a music distribution company. So even though they're two completely different roles, I do believe that the interviews can coincide with each other because it's still an interview. So people react a lot differently to pressure than others. For me, specifically, I tend to ramble. If somebody asks me a question, sometimes my answer might be a little too long, or there are times where I will completely forget the question halfway through answering it, which happens to me a lot. I don't know why, but I'll black out halfway through answering the question, which sucks because then you reach halfway through this answer and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, shoot, what was the question again? And that's mostly because of the pressure and because of the nervousness, so cut yourself some slack. But it's better to maybe avoid that by just being very intentional about the questions that they're asking and try and make sure that you understand the questions and that you answer the question. I remember with the hostess job, I felt more comfortable because it was more of a conversation. With the executive assistant position, that was more of a conversation as well. We'll get to that. But with this one specifically, it was more like I had things in common with the woman who was interviewing me. She was really sweet and she was young. And so I remember, there was probably more of a complimentary introduction, like I really love your shirt or cute shoes, have a more conversational interview than not. What was lovely about this is that I was able to relate to her in that I loved her shirt and she loved my shoes. And that was a nice icebreaker. So that's always really, really nice if you can kind of go into it with a relatable approach and maybe comment on something that they might have in common with you, like, oh, this weather, or I'm from here, and they say, oh my gosh, I just visited there. That's such a great way to start a conversation off in an interview because you're not only showing them that you have social skills, but that you're nice. Another thing I wanted to touch on is there are two different types of interviewers. You can either be approached with the non-direct interviewer or the direct interviewer. I have some notes over here, which is what I'm referencing. So the non-direct interviewer is probably more comfortable doing interviews and good at reading people. They're going to ask more open-ended questions. So it's important here to remind yourself not to ramble, which is what I do. Treat it like an interview, even if it feels conversational, and be sure to answer their questions within 30 seconds of your answer and then maybe stop talking. So if this is a more non-direct interview, it's still important to wrap up your answer in a timely manner so that you're not rambling or going on and on about this story that the interviewer doesn't care about. There is also the direct interviewer. This one is someone who probably has multiple interviews back to back, and they're really aiming at your background. So I know in my experience, I'll hop on a Zoom call and it was really fast. The interviewer asked 3 questions, and they're probably asking the same 3 questions to this, another group of people in that day. So you can just tell that this is strictly based off your background. Which those kinds of interviews can be harder to nail if you don't have the proper background that they're looking for. So in this case, it's really important to do your research, know what the company is, what they do, the ins and outs of it, know how you're going to be able to be a huge asset to the company without having to go into a lot of background about yourself, because it's not going to be more conversational. This is going to be you answering questions directly. Another important thing here with this kind of interview is to know your resume really well. Obviously, if you're in a Zoom call, you can maybe have your resume propped up so you can kind of reference it, but you don't want to make it seem like you're referencing something too often. So I would say just really know your resume, really know what you put on there. And obviously if you're in person, you can't look at your resume. So just know your resume really well. So they're going to want to know how you handle yourself in certain situations. So I think it's really important to maybe go over some previous interview questions that you've had in the past, or look up some interview questions on the internet so that you're prepared to answer more direct questions. But also be very straightforward in answering these questions because the interviewer is likely very busy. This is I'm answering your question, I'm giving you the background that I have. And this is why I'm going to be really good at this job. Okay, so this is coming from now my executive assistant position that I currently have, because it was a more non-direct interview situation. It was more conversational, but it was for my first ever job in the music industry. So the reason why I feel as though it's important to know how you're going to bring value to this company is because if you don't have the proper background in this kind of, interview situation, you might be able to sell yourself in a way. So obviously the little things like looking the part, eye contact, body language, professionalism, don't use the word like, don't use the word all of these things are going to be really important in this situation. So bad. I'm so guilty of it too. Going into this interview, I knew that I had music industry experience, but I didn't have music business industry experience on my resume. That was like specifically I had worked, at a label or at a studio or like anything. Like I just didn't have that previous music industry experience. But what I did have is my own personal music industry experience from being an artist. And what aligned so nicely with this position was I did have professional executive assistant experience. So what happened is they looked at my resume and they said, oh, this girl has executive assistant experience, a music industry background. She's an artist. She's passionate about the music industry. And then I got the interviews. My resume was really, I formed around this position specifically, highlighting the executive assistant work that I have had in the past, and also in my cover letter explaining my passion for the music industry and my desire to work in it and be a part of it. If you don't have a lot of job experience in this specific role that you're applying for or having an interview for, it's just really important to sell yourself. Have the confidence going into this that you are exactly what they're looking for. Tell them that you're exactly what they're looking for. Give them reasons why. So for example, like in this interview, I remember the interviewer asked me, why do you want to work in the music industry? Again, a really broad, open-ended question. What I said is that because I've been in music since I was a little girl, I've always known that this is what I'm meant to do. I feel driven for this. I'm very excited about this. While I don't have 12 plus years of music industry experience at like a huge label or something, I have the experience for the title they're looking for alongside my passion for the industry, which made me a really solid candidate for the role. Whatever you're good at, make sure that you utilize that as your ammo, because it is. If you don't have 12 plus years of experience in what they're looking for, sell yourself. Give them a reason to believe that you are the perfect person for this role. But everything that we just talked about, knowing your resume, not rambling too much, keeping the interview about the company, selling yourself, the confidence, X, Y, and Z, we've discussed a lot of it just now. If you still have questions about how to nail a specific interview that maybe wasn't touched on in this episode, please comment it below so that we can discuss it together next time. I have a lot of experience having interviews. I have a lot of experience getting jobs. I've worked with a lot of different kinds of people, so I'd be happy to share advice that I have in previous roles that I've had. And at the end of the day, don't get too worked up about this interview. If you don't have the exact background that they're looking for, like we discussed, sell the hell out of yourself. But if for some reason, you're just not the right fit for the role, it's probably because it wasn't for you. I know for me, I had an interview, I didn't get the position, even though I thought that I sold myself really well and was a really great candidate for the role. I didn't get the position, and what ended up happening was like a month later, I had the interview for the current job that I have now, and I'm really happy here. So I feel like everything happens for a reason. If one door closes, two others are going to open. So just be patient with yourself. Do research, connect with people on LinkedIn, know the audience, know who you're going to be having an interview with, do a little research on them, do a little research on the company. Like, you don't need to have a ton of experience to nail a job interview, you guys. You're going to kill it and it's going to be great. Just look the part, have the confidence, and you'll nail it. And let me know, comment below. You're great. I'm so excited for you. Nailed this interview. I cannot wait to hear how it goes.